Hey guys, welcome to A Little Help for Our Friends, the podcast for people with loved ones struggling with mental health. Hello, little helpers. Today we're going to do an episode I've wanted to do for a really long time, but I've been waiting for a guest, and that hasn't panned out because it's a deeply personal episode. So I think we're going to try to get a guest maybe for a second episode, but for now, Kibby and I want to open up the topic, in part because one of you actually requested it. So the requested episode was on open relationships. I'm going to suggest that we broaden it a little bit to say ethical non-monogamy, of which open relationships is a type of relationship within E&M. But I'll read you the question and then we can start discussing. So the listener said, I just listened to the episode on situationships or friends with benefits, and I have so many questions. Why are women more likely to catch feelings in these situations? Does research show that they are? Can you do an episode on open relationships? I'm in an open marriage, dating 9 years, married for 2, and we largely opened the marriage because I wanted more experience with sex. But I found that sex without feelings isn't as good to me, so now I at least want to trust/value my other partners without necessarily falling in love with them. Hope they can do the same towards me. I know I'm playing with fire, but that's part of what I get out of it. It's fun and exciting. I just wonder what your general advice would be on open relationships/ what the research says. Okay. This person is from Missouri, which actually I think adds an interesting element to this. I have been kind of adjacent to the E&M community, or I was at least when I lived in New York last time. I dated somebody for a bit who had been E&M for like 10 years.
E&M is
Um,
ethical non-monogamy, right?
Ethical
Okay.
non-monogamy,
Just
which basically means that you're non-monogamous, but it's consensual. You're trying to do this in an ethical way, in an intentional way. And I think the reason I think the Missouri piece is interesting is that when I was kind of adjacent to this, adjacent meaning like I was dating this guy who was E&M and all of his friends were E&M and we would hang out with them, we'd go to their parties. They had a set community that I think made it easier to do this. And it does interest me that this person is in Missouri because I would think that that would be very different.
Hmm.
So we can just put a pin in that. But I do think it might be a consideration of like where you live. Are you thinking of doing this and how that might influence your choice?
Yeah. And by the way, we
Mhm.
love that you guys have written in with questions. So if you ever have questions or topic suggestions or anything we want to address, in your show notes, it says like send us a text or something like that. Just click that and you could text us directly. We can't text you back there. So if you want us to respond, put your email there. But we love this. We love that Missouri wrote us with this question. So thank
You
you.
can also, of course, write to me on Instagram at Trumbelina or Kibby at Coolama.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm trying to think where we should start. E&M is a specific topic, but also kind of a broad topic because it's an umbrella term that contains a bunch of different kinds of relationships, which
Yeah.
creates a bit of a research dilemma, sort of like the situationships or friends with benefits thing did. It's kind of like, what are we actually talking about? This person requested open relationships, which can itself mean a lot of things, but I think most typically it refers to you have a primary partner, you two are committed, but you can have like extramarital sex. Or, sorry, you don't have to be married. You can have sex outside of the relationship. The extent of the, I guess, commitment or feelings for the other people is a little bit like less specified. But if we're talking about a relationship where you have like multiple full on relationships, then colloquially people say that's polyamory. The research literature was a little bit more vague about that. So I just feel like once again, when we were researching this topic, just a little bit all over the place because it's trying to refer to so many things. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that and what comes up for you when you hear E&M?
Yeah, I mean, When we were talking about this, I really wanted to know what is the what's the definition of an open relationship versus polyamory, because I wanted to address them separately in separate episodes. And I'm like, okay, well, then I guess it must be the expectation about what those quote unquote other relationships are like, or maybe in my mind, open relationships mean there's like one central relationship that you're in, and then you can engage in sex with other people. But what does that mean if it's like you can engage in sex with the same person, right? Like, let's say you're in a marriage or partnership,
Yeah.
and then you have sex with someone else consistently, like a
Right.
situationship with someone else. Is
Hmm.
that polyamory? Because then it's like a consistent relationship with multiple people,
Right.
or is that an open relationship? So
Right.
the my first question is what is what? What
Yeah.
what are the definitions here?
No, it's tough, and so I think our purpose in today's episode is not to give some like expert opinion on this, but rather introduce the topic, start introducing the terms, and talk about what, different elements of it that can make it more successful or not. And then just our psychological perspective.
Yeah.
But I don't want this to be confused with like we are experts on ENM and, we're going to throw down. And in part, it's because of this. I mean, it's a little bit hard for me to say who would be an expert on ENM who isn't in one of these relationships because that's just the research is muddy. Um, I I like the term E&M because I know a lot of people in these relationships, and every single couple looks totally different. I know a couple where their kink is like watching each other have sex with other people,
Mhm.
but there is no allowance for continuing those relationships. I know a couple where they are primary partners. They're not looking for relationships with others, but they are looking to consistently date other people. And one of the reasons is bisexuality. One of the people is bisexual and so likes to explore with both. The other is a kinkster and so likes to explore his kink in other relationships. I know I know someone who has like multiple like boyfriends and girlfriends. They're also queer. Um, I know married couples who go to sex parties regularly. Like it's such a gamut. And so when a research paper looks at anyone, it looks at E&M and asks questions about it, it's kind of like looking at monogamous relationships. Like it's a bit hard to say, is monogamy successful? Like what makes it successful? Because that just even within monogamous relationships, there's such variation and diversity. Obviously it's specific that you're just together, but that's just one component of your relationship, and so many different things come in to make it successful or not successful. So it's the same thing with E&M. um, I did consult with a friend of mine who is in an E&M relationship for this episode, and he gave me like a lot of feedback and kind of things to talk about. So I'd want to dive into that stuff too. Um, but I guess just to real quick address her first question, which is why are women more likely to catch feelings in situationships? I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think it's the conventional wisdom and like true from an evolutionary perspective. So not capital T true, but just like what the evolutionary perspective would suggest, because women are suggested to be more interested in commitment. Um, and I think there are sort of brain anatomy and hormonal reasons why women can tend to have feelings for men that they sleep with over time. I think the female orgasm is, I should have looked into this more, but I think the female orgasm like releases particular hormones that are connected. I don't know if it's oxytocin or what. I don't know why that wouldn't be the case for men, but there's a book on it called The Female Brain that might be interesting. But some of this is dated, and I mean, a lot of men are more likely to um, catch feelings in situationships. So I didn't mean to suggest that it was always going to be the woman who would be most um, at risk of like finding commitment.
Yeah, it's also now what feelings do we mean at this point?
Yeah.
Because it's, especially when we're blurring a bunch of different conventions. I guess catching feelings when I first heard that, I thought, oh, meaning I want more. I want a more of a commitment from that person. And that just makes sense biologically because it's so much more of an investment on our
Hmm.
bodies to have a baby, right? Like
Hmm.
as much as I've, really appreciate modern society for what we can do, it's still like if I get pregnant, I am going to really need that commitment from that partner, whereas the other partner can just, male partner can just impregnate many women.
Yeah.
Elon Musk, for example.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that if we're committing ourselves sexually, then there are hormonal and physiological responses of like, I want to make sure that this guy stays around and protects me and takes care of the baby that we're having. So, I
Right.
mean, that's just like really pure, but like catching feelings, I mean, I've definitely been in situations where, situationships or sexual romantic relationships where the guy's more into me, right?
Hmm.
But that could mean like he just wants to have more sex with me and that kind of commitment versus like wanting the relationship. So I guess it's like what do you mean by catching feelings in these situations?
Right. I mean, I predict the research would show that women are less interested in going to bars every night and finding people to have one night stands with. Um, I think people try to make arguments that sex is like just as desirable to women and wanted by women as men. And I can see arguments for that, but at the same time, women don't seem to make decisions with sex as the first priority in the same way that men do. Um, they don't seem to choose relationships purely on the basis of sex in the same way. Yeah, I just see men centering sex in their decision making processes a lot more than women, and going after it a lot more than women. But in part, that's 'cause women don't have to go after it.
I think we're just in this really weird phase of society where social connection and relationships are rapidly changing to like breakneck speed to the point where we don't even like constructs about sexuality and gender,
Yeah.
like it's just moving too fast for us to really understand. But it's just interesting that all of this challenges monogamy and its use in our society, right? Like, do we really need it? I mean, I think traditionally it has a lot of religious roots,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you're married to God, and like what you're allowed to do sexually with your partner versus other people. A lot of other spiritual practices will say like how much can other men or other partners like see your skin or hair or even touch you, right? There's a lot of like
Mm-hmm.
these social rules around what that marriage is for and what you can do with sex. And sex
Yeah.
is a way to have a family. So only do that with the person you're going to have a family with. But
Yeah.
now we're like, hey, uh, I have a sexual side and a sexual part of me that it wants to explore just as much as I want to explore like different kinds of friendships.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is it like to have sex with women and men or people with different kinds of kinks or things like that? So
Mm-hmm.
it is unreasonable to believe that your one partner can fulfill all of that.
Yeah.
So I think before when it was just so taboo that anything is cheating, anything else would be cheating. Now it's like, okay, let's admit that more people do this or are curious about it than we were willing to admit before, and let's actually put different labels
Yeah.
to kind of signal to everyone else what we're looking for and what we are open to.
I think the historical perspective is interesting here because it has always been assumed, and we were kind of giving the historical perspective of like, you know, women need commitment from men because it's so much more of an investment on the woman's part. And so we need monogamy. And so, marriage or monogamy is like an institution that allows children to be raised to an ideal standard because they have the investment of both parents. And without that, women would be screwed and men would just be spreading their seed everywhere. But there's another perspective that I'm not sure has been upheld, but a book, and I'm blanking on the name of it, that was written, I believe, by like sociologists or not biologists though, basically argued that back when human beings were nomadic, the ideal way to raise children wasn't necessarily in monogamous dyads because you're constantly moving and you don't have any property. And so it's actually more beneficial to have to have the community raise the children. And in that sense, paternity doesn't matter as much. You could have sex with like multiple different partners, you have multiple babies, and then the community raises them, and then that's fine. And then the argument was basically that monogamy arose from farming, where suddenly these communities became they didn't move. Why am I not able to find words today?
Stationary?
What?
Stationary?
Stationary, sure. um, and then property became a thing. So, when they started farming, it's like, okay, I need this piece of land for myself because these are my resources. I'm tending to them. And I then see a woman as a necessary piece of property because I can't, we're not moving around altogether. Like we're sitting in one place. We're not sharing to the same degree any of our resources. And paternity is suddenly important because without this kind of like the community raises the children, your resources are very important to you. They're yours, and you want them to go to your own genes.
Interesting.
And so suddenly it became very important to say, no, that woman is my woman. She is not allowed to have sex with any other men because only she knows her maternity for sure. I don't know. So now I must protect her. So these people would argue that monogamy is actually an institution that more or less oppresses women and is used for paternity and
Ownership.
ownership, and basically actually also like puts most of the work on on like a singular woman to raise the children. Now again, like I don't know how much evidence, but there was a lot of pushback to this book. One of the arguments was also that we tend to align ourselves with a chimpanzee and say that's our closest living relative, but actually we're equally related to the bonobo, which is extraordinarily ENM. Let's
They're
say.
wild. They have a great time. Lots of orgies.
So I don't know, right? Like I think though one point my friend made is people see E&M as this crazy idea that's just doomed to fail, but 50% of marriages are doomed to fail. So we're already not working with very good numbers here.
Yeah, it just shows how much there is such a mainstream that's just a standard that's floating around in our collective conscious, where it's like, okay, what I'm looking for in life and what the sign of success and the thing that will work and that we're all going for is that find that partner, marry them, have that huge wedding, have 2 kids, have a job, balance it all, blah, 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 right? There's still such a really very specific way that we look at partnerships and marriage. And I'm thinking about it's like if when I go to Hong Kong for my Chinese family, I mean, there is that expectation too, but there is a lot more of this group raising children. And then like cheating, for example, is way more accepted. Like sadly, men are like, it's no big deal if they have mistresses on the side. It's almost kind of expected that they do, as
Only for
long as
men
they don't,
though?
huh?
Only for men though?
Kind of. I
Yeah.
don't know, maybe now with modern era, I have no idea what's going on now over there, but it was like not a big deal that men could have mistresses, and as long as they don't embarrass the family, like as long as it's not like open, and as long as the man stays like loyal to the family in terms of like contributing what he does and providing. And I've even heard some people over there say like actually it's kind of nice because when you have kids and you're exhausted and you don't want to have sex, like he doesn't get upset. He goes and satisfies that need somewhere else. So the idea of like family is slightly separated from who you can have sex with, which is
Hmm.
really interesting. And
Well, and
yeah.
that also conforms to the paternity hypothesis, where, both needs are being, the woman is getting the investment of the man, and the man is getting his paternity met. The woman's not going out cheating. It's just him that's allowed to, you know, uh, go out and kind of smell other
Yeah.
flowers.
And the only thing that makes that seem palatable, if like let's say I put myself in that culture, I would be so if I'm ever thinking about the risks with, opening up a relationship, my
Hmm.
fear is if I'm going to lose the things that I have, right? Like
Hmm.
if I open up my marriage, what if Alex goes and like sleeps with someone else? Okay, but what if he falls in love and leaves me?
Right.
And in a culture where the cheating is is okay, but you still have that property,
Hmm.
as long as like the I had to say it, like quote bastards don't get the property, right? It's like as long as the family gets the inheritance
Hmm.
and having the mistresses doesn't risk the property transfer to the kids,
Yeah.
that would make it okay. And so it's interesting, yeah.
It's interesting because that also is more about property, whereas I think
Mhm.
the American attitude is more about love. What if he
Mhm.
falls in love somewhere else? So even if he came back and said, I'll stay here and like Jackson will get all of our resources and everything,
Mhm.
you'd still be bummed. Like, but
Mhm.
what if you love the other person? And then also we have more of an obsession with equality here, and most people probably wouldn't be cool with like husband's allowed to cheat, but wife isn't.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, we have crazy expectations over here for what our partner should be. It should be our best friend, should
Hmm.
be our soul sex partner. It should be our main source of affection and all the different things that you were talking about before, the triangular theory of love. Like, what was it? The passion, the intimacy and trust, and commitment.
Yeah.
Are the three?
Hmm.
One person should give me all of that.
Hmm.
And opening it up would risk losing that person or losing
Well, I
them.
mean, not only that, but as Esther Perel would say, like they also have to be the funniest person I've ever met, the best looking person, the mysterious person who I have total desire for, and also the person that this is again to the triangular theory, like also the person that I have trust and can feel safe with. Um, the smartest, the richest, the whatever. We're always like looking for this perfect person, and I think what E&M does is sidestep that a little bit and say it's funny when I would go to sex parties, I would see people hook up with other people who I deem to be like for there to be a big attraction uh
Sure.
difference, delta. I was like, this is interesting. But when you're not looking for the one, you can appreciate people for all sorts of different reasons.
Hmm.
Like you could say, okay, maybe this isn't my usual type, but who cares? I'm not out here just looking for one representative of my usual type. I can go outside my type. I can find this person attractive for other reasons and just have all of these experiences with all sorts of different people because there's just no pressure for them to be perfect.
If you could open up your relationship, would you, and why? I guess this is a question of like what do you hope and expect your main partner or the, primary partner to give you, and what are you allowed to look for in other relationships? So,
Yeah.
what would that be if you can be like, okay, we have this, and then I go outside for that.
Well, so first of all, I would not open it, but there was a time when that answer would be different. Not really with Jason. I've said, I think what I would like is for in 10 years to have a State of the Union address and we kind of figure out like where is our sex life and how much trust do we have and actually would it be beneficial for us to go, pollinate elsewhere and kind of bring in some of that like excitement and fire that our listener was talking about. He's not open to that, so whatever. Um, I personally have become a lot less romantic in the past 5 years. Yeah, Kibby's looking at me
I
quizzically.
don't think that's true, but go
Well,
on, go on.
It's true in a particular way. So I think the way I've become more romantic is that I'm actually willing to accept another person and love them for who they are and appreciate relationships more.
Yeah.
So you're like, yeah, duh. Okay, that sounds very romantic. But what I mean when I become less romantic is that I've become less like Rilke or the Impressionists or like the kind of I've become less obsessed with love, less obsessed with like love and beauty and lyricism and
More an
um,
infatuation, more the romantic.
Right.
in a different, yeah,
Right.
I see
But
what
when I was
that's cool.
obsessed with,
Mhm.
when I was more romantic, um, I think polyamory was more appealing to me because I wanted to test out so many different kinds of loves. I wanted to experience everything. I was more invested in the infatuation element. And I knew that infatuation would sort of fade over time. And so E&M was a way to resuscitate that.
Hmm.
And that's just less of an interest for me now. But I understand for other people, it remains an interest, and that's fine. And, I do think that certain things are kind of impossible in just a monogamous relationship. Like, I think it's kind of impossible for you to feel the same dopamine hit 5 years, 10 years into a monogamous relationship than you do in, an E&M setup where you can go and meet new people and have that excitement. And if that's really valuable to you, and genuinely no judgment, because it's a amazing feeling. If that's really valuable, then maybe that's great. That's, I think, kind of a romantic side of it. Um, but I also just think that there are plenty of other reasons why people do E&M, and many people who are E&M would roll their eyes at that part of my explanation. But for me, that's why I initially had an interest in it, was because I wanted to experience all sorts of different people. I wanted that dopamine hit. I was romantic. I wanted love, 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 and with a bunch of different people.
Mhm.
So
If you could open it up to get to have that kind of the dopamine hit of crushes and dates and all that stuff, would you do it?
no, I'm just not interested in that anymore. And I think the risks of it and the costs of it are just too high considering my low interest in all of that. The risk being, yeah, like I develop feelings for somebody else and that tumbles my relationship, or Jason does. And I think not just that. The thing I wish I had said in the Friends with Benefits episode, I'm going to say it here instead, is that what I find difficult is that if you have a friend with benefits, you already have a friendship. Friendship confers certain benefits already. Like, if I go to jail, I could call Kibby to pick me up and maybe she would come, right? Like, Kibby, gets me dinner sometimes. Kibby, like, it gives me emotional support when I need it. And the problem is that when you add sex, but not commitment, and I don't actually mean sexual commitment, I mean like commitment in some other fashion, there is a risk that you asking for those other benefits comes across as you wanting more from the relationship.
Give us an example. What is that?
If I'm having sex with a guy friend and I want him to take me to dinner, that might seem like I want him to be my boyfriend. Or if I want him to pick me up from the airport, or if I don't want him to call some other hoe while he's in bed with me, then that might seem like, oh, she's not actually comfortable with this casual setup. She wants more. When in reality, I want those things because you're my friend and friends respect
Mhm,
each other and
mhm.
protect each
I see.
other,
I see.
right? And it's really, really hard to know where the lines are
Right.
of those kinds of prioritizations and commitment.
Yeah.
What I like about E&M is that it does not assume that sex is the cornerstone of the commitment. I've heard a lot of people say, well, if you're going to fuck other people, then what's the point of a relationship? That's what a relationship is. And I'm like, really? Is it? Because when I think about my relationship, sex is an ingredient, but it's not the main ingredient.
Mhm.
And I could have sex with other people, but I would still fully believe that I'm in a committed relationship because I know that he's the first person I'd call if I needed something, and vice versa. I know that I have someone to come home to. I know I have somebody that I'm designing and building a life with that is going to outlast, the vicissitudes of the day to day.
Yeah.
And that to me is what commitment is. And I've always appreciated that E&M has put the focus on those things, or said, okay, what does commitment mean to us? Instead of making an assumption that sexual exclusivity is the definition of a commitment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the commitment we have just a shorthand and we thought we knew what that meant. Commitment. If I just say, "Oh, why isn't he committing to me?" You
Mhm.
might think, "Why isn't that person exclusive with me
Mhm.
at this point?" Right? But it's almost just like commitment now is like, is that person committed to meeting the expectations that you have for them,
Mhm.
or want to have for them? Um, yeah, and it's just interesting as you were talking about, I was thinking that it is so weird that all of my other relationships, my romantic relationships started with sex or hooking up.
Mhm.
Usually they were friends or like, acquaintances, and then we would primarily start the intimacy with the sex.
Mhm.
And then it would develop into, okay, we're not having sex with anyone else. Therefore, we are now together. And then
Mhm.
that would lead to other expectations of, well, now you're my emotional support. Now, like if I'm having a bad day and I call you and the person goes, "Why are you calling me?" Ugh, that would be weird because my expectation is like now we're in a committed relationship. That means that we could share those kind of like we're emotional support, right?
Yeah.
So it kind of like layered on a bunch of commitment. With Alex, my current husband, it's we had 18 years of friendship first and had all sorts of commitment except for the sex. The
Mhm.
sex was the last thing we added to our relationship, and it's just so bizarre because yeah, when I think about it, I'm like, sex is probably like the last thing that makes us us. What
Mhm.
makes what makes him and I special to me is that I know that I can trust him in all these different ways. I trust him to be there when I was sick or my emotional support, when to be like a good co-parent, to build a life together, right? And the sexual monogamy was not the first set of commitments that we made together. It
Yeah.
was in this iteration, but like not in the course of our relationship. So,
Mhm.
I don't know. This is just making me all think about like what is commitment and what is a relationship. So, like for you, you say like the sex the monogamy for sex is not the most important, is not the core part for you. What would you see?
I had a crystal ball, and it said, "Hey, you and Jason are going to open your marriage sexually, but he will never fall in love with another person, and he will never prioritize another person over you, and vice versa. Would you allow it?" I'd still probably not be that interested, but I'd be like, huh, maybe. Like, depends on what the benefits are. If it leads to a steamier sex life for both of us, then like, cool. If it leads to me meeting new people that I find really interesting and cool and like get to go on dates with them, then maybe it's worth it. But yeah, I mean, for me, I have a point person. I have a person that I go to when I need him. I have the person that's just there and loves me and thinks of me and is there for me. And I have a person with whom to share a future. And it's that kind of future orientation and building that really makes up the commitment for me.
What if, okay, so what we're talking about is the risk for you is that he would fall in love with somebody else. That's the risk,
Yeah.
right? What if he is like, hey, let's open up the relationship. I might fall in love with someone else.
Hmm.
However, no matter what, you and I are making this life together. We're gonna have kids, we're gonna have a family, we're gonna get married. Um, I might no. Okay, you're shaking your head. I mean, I know this is impossible. This is more of a thought experiment of like, what if you get the commitment that the thing that makes the core of your relationship won't go away, but then that means that it opens up the parameters on the sexual side or even the emotional love side.
Yeah. I mean, and some people would be totally cool with that. I have an absence of jealousy, but I would not say that I have compersion, which is, when you basically are happy for your partner having like other sexual experiences or other love
Mhm.
experiences. And you're like, what makes you happy is knowing that that person is really enjoying themselves and really connecting deeply and, fulfilling something in themselves. I'm not that good of a person. And so Jason falling in love with somebody else is just not in my interests in any way. And would make me feel bad about myself.
Why?
Um,
Why? If he's like, I still love, respect you, want to have kids with you, want to build this family with you, and oh, my mistress or my other girlfriend, I love her so much. Like,
right. I mean, I can make a rational argument
you
for
were
why
on The
that would be.
Bachelor. You were like technically on somehow our society was like, cool, we're allowing in the world of the Bachelor Nation for this man
Mm.
to have 30 quote girlfriends, right? So you all were like the girlfriends. You
But
were
I didn't develop feelings for him until I knew I was going to leave.
Then you became his girlfriend along with all others. So what?
And then I left.
Okay.
You
Yeah.
also know it's temporary, you know.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, look, there have been times actually where I could conceivably be interested in an E&M relationship if I were the other woman. I just wouldn't want to be the primary partner in these setups.
Why? What is that? What?
Because I do think I'm still romantic enough to just want one person to
Uh-huh.
be mine. And like
For love and
for me to be their one person, sorry. For love and commitment. Like I can make a rational argument for why it would be a beautiful thing for them to love other people and for me to love other people. Like I think it's lovely when other people do it. Um I'm very judgmental of friends with benefits, but I'm not very judgmental about E&M. Like I think when it works, it's a beautiful thing. It's just not something I want to do personally. I mean, would you be cool with Alex falling in love with
Right,
someone
but
else?
what is the thing that you're risking? Let's say my thought experiment where he's having sex with someone else, he's in love with someone else, but you get the commitment that you were just saying. Like,
And he still loves me, right? In this thought
yeah.
experiment? Yeah, my ego, I think.
Is it that you're not special? You're not like the
Yeah,
most special. Okay.
yeah.
Right. What is that? What if he's like, I love you and I love you equally?
Yeah, that's terrible. I don't love that at all.
So it's being special. It's being loved as the
Yeah,
only one that you
yeah.
get that special heart. What if he's like, I'm in love with your intellect. This other girl, I'm in love with her snowboarding skills. I don't know. Like, how would that
That would be slightly more acceptable to me since I don't value snowboarding skills.
feel? That's what I'm saying. Like, what?
But I would still, I just don't think there's any, yeah, my ego would just be burnt.
Okay, so Jason, you're not gonna get a harem.
He
I don't
doesn't
know if that's on
want.
the table. You're not gonna get that.
Oh, I'm a much greater risk of wanting a harem than he is. He's very much like, no.
Yeah, yeah, there.
I mean, what would you be okay with Alex loving someone else?
This is the question. I mean, I think that this topic is opening up the question of what does make up a relationship? What makes up your primary relationship? If you're in an open relationship, what makes it open versus just like, you're having multiple relationships? What
This
can we
is
expect? What kind of commitment can we expect from a romantic partner? And um I think there's just this gut piece of not feeling special, right? There's
mm-hmm,
of preferring another woman.
mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing for me and Alex is like I spent most of our relationship like being his wing woman and
Mhm.
watching and listening to all of his like romantic and sexual exploits, which there were many. Um, on YouTube now. But and there was something fun in that for me because I got to see, first of all, I got to see a different side of him than I did when he was with me. He was more he's quite shy in many ways, but he also is very good socially, and he's very like very empathetic and in tune, and can like when he can turn things on and like go for someone, he really can.
So you saw him in
And
his
so
element.
yeah, and so like it was fun to watch him do that,
Mhm.
and then discover about that person, right? And I just, as a psychologist, we love learning about like the intimate parts of relationships and people. So it was kind of like a window into that. So actually, us getting together made me lose like this really awesome window I had, and I really miss it to the point where I've said to him jokingly and not jokingly, like, maybe we should open up the relationship so you could date again so I can get that satisfaction back.
Oh.
Well, because I always felt like I had this special position with him. Like I
Mhm.
was special in a different way. Like I don't think anyone could replace me in his life, like
Mhm.
as a friend or whatever, because we just had this really special friendship. And then even if you were to sleep with someone else, I don't think he's at risk of going away in the sense of replacing me or building a family with somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the key thing. I think that when we talk about open relationships and what's the risk is like, how do we protect what is that one thing that we want from that partner, that's our primary partner, and how do we protect that? If we're opening it up to them sleeping with other people, then is that opening up the risk that they're going to fall in love and find another woman special? Yeah, I mean, that's all I
It's so weird
think.
that I've become like the super monogamous one. Because when I was with Paul, I was all about Paul. No, I mean I had ulterior motives there, which is that I wasn't happy in my relationship. But I do get what you mean. It is somewhat intriguing for me to think about Jason hitting on another girl. And I've always thought it would be kind of hot to like watch him with another girl.
Hmm.
I don't think it's hot enough to really make it worth it. But I could also see how in many years when we do have more of a friendship, like right now I'm still seeing him hit on me. And so, maybe Alex is still hitting on you. I don't know, but you two just have such a different relationship history that they're just apples and oranges. Um, right now, I just think I'm so relieved to be in a relationship where I don't want to open it up. Like, I don't want to meet other people, that I'm just fully invested here. But I've never been I've never been the person who is possessive or who I don't know. I joke with him all the time. He's like, "How would you feel if I just like got a blowjob from someone else?" I'd be like, "Well, I mean, as long as you film it and send it to me, whatever." Like,
Hmm. So
um,
then how are we distilling, like, let's say our fans question of like, we wanted to open up the relationship to experience more sex, but she's not experiencing the same level of excitement or joy from sex without the feelings. So
mhm,
what do you do in that scenario? How do you So for example, like for our fan who wrote in and said, "I want to open up the relationship so that I can experience the pleasure of having sex with multiple people."
mhm.
Now, in order to do that and really enjoy it, feelings should be involved, right? Like it's just way more fun to have sex with someone you care about and trust and are attracted to, right?
For some people,
But then, how do you prevent the risks of losing whatever makes the commitment of the primary relationship happen, right? Like, how do you prevent yourself from falling in love with someone else?
I don't know if
And
you can.
is that even an option? Is that even like,
Yeah.
can you do that? Or are you just inherently causing problems by opening up the relationship and increasing the risk that someone else falls in love with someone else?
I mean, I think you increase the risk, but I think there are certain things you can do. I mean, what I love about E&M is that you don't accept a template of a relationship and assume this is what makes our relationship a relationship and these are the rules. You get to make your own. So it's a conversation with her husband about, look, here's my dilemma. What do we want to do about this? I had one couple who, I think part of this goes back to like, what are feelings, right? So she's talking about a greater trust and intimacy, which is riskier because that grows over time and it kind of entails multiple meetings. I had I had a couple who they had a rule that like once that stuff starts, you're out. But that doesn't mean there were no feelings because what attracted them to the other people in the first place was chemistry. So yeah, it's more fun to have sex with people that you have feelings for, but what feelings are we talking about? Like for me, it would probably only be fun to have sex with people I had chemistry with, but didn't really have the other stuff because I knew it wouldn't be able to grow anywhere without threatening my relationship, and it wouldn't have the just like dopamine chemistry,
Yeah.
cocktail that I'm after. So, I mean, I think you have to define like what are we really looking for in these other relationships? Are we looking for dopamine? Are we looking for a chemistry cocktail? Or are we looking for the opportunity to really get to know other people and have strong emotional connections with other people? And it's totally legitimate to want that too, because there is a great excitement in really getting to intimately know multiple other people.
I think also yourself. I feel like
Mhm.
what I'm so glad I got to experiment sexually and romantically when I was younger, because then I got to experience different sex styles, like people
Mm-hmm.
liking slow or rough or, on furniture,
Mm-hmm.
like, different things. And I got to be different people with them and to see what I liked. So
Mm-hmm.
I feel, yeah, I feel like unless you have that, if you're in a monogamous relationship like all your life since you were young, I'm like, oh man, that's so sad. You missed out on the exploration. But like, hopefully that one partner you get to do that with. So
Right.
yeah, I don't see that the opening the relationship is inherently bad, but I do see that it's like, how do we then protect from the risks, which is like losing, like falling in love with someone else, breaking up the relationship. And I feel like that's a tricky thing because, I mean, that's tricky whether you're in an open or closed relationship, right? Like if you are afraid that your partner will fall in love with someone else, I mean, you don't have to have sex for that. They
Yeah.
could fall in love with their coworker, like whatever,
Yeah.
like that could just happen.
Right.
Probably is more likely if they're sleeping with that coworker, maybe because of all the oxytocin.
Yeah.
I have a friend here in New York who opened their marriage. This is a bad story. This is
Uh,
how it goes wrong. Opened their marriage. They had no intention of being polyamorous or like they were like, let's just sleep with other people and stay together and still have a family and still stay married, right? So they wanted the more of a traditional, like, we are together and making a family, but we could open up and have sex. So I think they had some rules around it, like they couldn't have sex with people that they knew in common or that were like in daily life
mhm.
or things like that. And they couldn't have sex in certain places. Like it couldn't be in one of their homes or it couldn't be. I think there was even rules around the types of sex they could have. Like they couldn't have like sex without protection or like yeah, right. There's like levels of like what they can do with that other person.
Mhm.
And the wife broke those rules and had sex with someone that they knew mutually and had sex without protection. And I forgot if it was in one of their homes, but they definitely broke a lot of the rules.
Oops.
Oopsie, right? And then, but she was like, okay, our main thing was to be honest with each other. So she told her partner and said, or her husband and said, this is what I did. We're not gonna, like, this was a one-time thing. This was within the bounds of our open relationship. I admit that it is someone that we know, blah, blah, blah. And the husband was furious.
Mhm.
Like, you cheated on me. Like,
Mhm.
you broke our marriage. And I think it took them a long time to repair from it. I think
Mhm.
they repaired. I don't know if there's like undercurrents of like upsetness with this or still pain, but um yeah, I feel like that this is an example. Everyone might listening might be like, "Oh yeah, of course." But like this is an example of, if you're opening a relationship, what you're doing is you have to make a custom set of rules for you and your relationship. You can't rely on like what's, like, you
Mhm.
know, common knowledge or traditional. You have to be like, okay, it's okay to have sex with someone, but it cannot be this group of people, right?
Mhm.
So you have to get really specific and have your own like agreement somewhere, and then breaking it would mean breaking that particular relationship. And so, or the expectations of that relationship. So, I
Yeah.
mean,
I've
it
thought.
just seems tough because there's so many other rules to pay attention
Yeah.
to, right?
Yeah.
Like having no sex with someone else is a lot easier than being like, okay, I can have sex with these people in these ways, but not in other ways, right? So,
Yeah. I have many thoughts. So the first is when you said, is there any way to do this like and minimize the risk? I think yes. I don't think you can eliminate the risk. I think the way to minimize the risk is to be super duper honest with yourself about why you're doing this and then give that your partner that honesty as well. So and when you're right about like closed relation, even in a monogamous relationship, there are still threats. So, for instance, there are like some men from my past that I am attracted to, or like kind of I've had like long-term crushes on. And what I when I first got together with Jason and started thinking about like, okay, what if these people interacted with me? The thing that became clear very quickly is I can have crushes on people for all sorts of different reasons, but it doesn't mean that they make good partners. And what makes Jason unique to me is that we have a really good partnership. And so, exploring other relationships could be cool, but ultimately, what I really value is having a really good partnership. So I think, like in my case, if we were to have an open relationship, like maybe I would go dally with those people, but keep in mind, you know, making that anything more than a dalliance doesn't serve my goals of having a really good partnership. Now, of course, it could turn out that they seem like they're really good partners, but you don't really know that very easily. So, I mean, I think you could say, like, okay, why are we really doing it? Are we doing this because we want chemistry? Like, we want to explore dopamine? Okay, if we're going to do that, what's the safest way and most intentional way we can do that without threatening the relationship? And it sounds like your friends attempted to do that, but I don't know, like from your story, I can't tell why they decided to open up the marriage, what exactly they were looking for. And I wonder if there was a breakdown there, if they weren't really, really clear in their heads why they're doing this. Because if she was able to break a rule, I don't know how easily she broke it, but it just kind of suggests that she went for something that was sort of outside of the bounds of what she ostensibly wanted.
Hmm.
Um, the second part, though, is that when you make a custom set of rules and you do something that is not really applauded by society and there's not a whole lifetime of your own like conditioning around it, there may need to be some flexibility and forgiveness around it because it is really easy to make mistakes. And so, do you want a mistake to break up your relationship? It sounds like these two people repaired, and so it just took like a lot of repair work. But you have to kind of decide, like, if you don't use a condom once, like how detrimental is that? On the one hand, it's really, really important that we use condoms. Like it's really, really important. But on the other hand, like it is really easy to slip up if you're gonna be doing the things that kind of often come along with dating again, like drinking, bar hopping, like meeting new people with their own different standards and rules. And it's just, there are so many opportunities for things to go wrong. Which is why ENM requires so much communication. And I think that that is a double edged sword. Because on the one hand, as my friend pointed out, he's like, if any of your listeners have the opportunity to meet ENM couples, they might learn a lot because they communicate so effectively, so abundantly, so thoroughly that it's really a kind of model. And these people in a way are like superheroes at relationships. They're like supercharged, right? Like they talk about everything. The honesty levels are much higher in, I shouldn't say that, but like they can be much higher than other couples. The vulnerability can be much higher because you're revealing so much about yourself that maybe monogamous couples would try to keep more under wraps. On the other hand, do you really want to talk about your relationship that much?
Like what? Give us more tips on what your friend said makes it work. Like what does a communication in an ENM relationship look like versus traditional ones, let's say.
I mean, like, let's say that you're doing ENM in part because of a kink. You probably have to be very, very honest with your partner about that kink and why it's so important to you and why you can't do it with them. And maybe it's because the partner isn't willing to. And maybe it's like because you want that chemistry cocktail. You have to be really honest about like the extent to which you can get that in your current relationship. I think a lot of monogamists pretend like that's not a thing and pretend like their relationship is perfect and gives them absolutely everything they want, and non-monogamists can't. They have to admit, like, I don't get all of my needs met in this relationship, and the other person has to sit with that.
Yeah.
Right? It's a bit of an ego ding, and they have to talk about like what needs they can possibly meet and what needs can't they meet and why they can get it with other people, and then that they have to be constantly updating like what's going on in your other relationships, how serious is this getting, or any threats emerging, like how are your feelings, do we need to monitor anything, like is this partner dragging you away from me, is this my jealousy emerging. I mean there's just like there's so many conversation topics that that just have to be talked through.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really cool. I guess the idea is like, yeah, you're doing your own custom relationship, so you're not relying on any assumptions,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like if Alex says, "Oh, I'm going out to dinner with a friend. She's a girl and she's really pretty," I'm probably not gonna talk a lot about it because I'm just kind of like, okay, there's an assumption there that he's not gonna sleep with her or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. But in order to have all that level of conversation, like what do you want from this dinner? Like what are things that I'm worried about?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I wonder too if we were talking last time in situationships about the non-reciprocal nature, like what makes a situationship versus friends with benefits is like how does everyone feel about what they're doing?
Mm-hmm.
If you there I've heard some open relationships happening because one person wants to sleep with other people and the other one is like I have to give them that in order to keep them in a really like sad way
Mm-hmm.
or let's just say one partner really wants to open it and the other one is like going along with it and is like maybe different levels of open to that but if they had a choice they wouldn't open it, right? This was
Yeah,
just something that would make that person happy. That's I don't know if that's a recipe for disaster, but that's really tricky because then
I think it's a recipe for disaster.
yeah, I mean they're going to have different motivations for opening it, right? The person who's like giving into it is going to I would just be like, "Okay, now I have to find someone to sleep with just so I don't get super jealous and I'm not that,
Mm-hmm.
and I get into this and I don't really want to, but if I don't sleep with that anybody, then they are sleeping around. Then it's
Mm-hmm.
just like not fair."
Yeah.
So that imbalance, I'm sure, is super risky.
My friend's number one point that he made was that a lot of people judge E&M because the experiences they've had with people they know in it is that it fails, but it's because the people they knew did it as a last resort for a dying relationship,
Mhm.
and that is almost never going to work because it's just pouring gasoline on a relationship that's failing, and that this is something that needs to be done in strong relationships or between two people who have probably like who at least have definite interest in it or like demonstrated experience with it because it's a lot of work and it takes a lot of finesse. And if you've if you've got a relationship that's failing, you probably don't have two people who are communicating really well.
Mhm.
So how are you going to introduce something that entails a shitload of communication? It just doesn't make
Mhm.
any sense.
Yeah.
And so if one person wants it but the other person doesn't, we're already starting at a really bizarre place of
Yeah.
like, yeah. I mean, we haven't even talked about like polyamory, which is like having multiple relationships at the same
I
time.
think we should do that in a
We'll do another
totally
episode.
other
All right,
episode
cool.
because I think that's something that's gotten a lot more mainstream and it's
Hmm.
just so super interesting and it's all of this is like putting names on things that have already happened, right? That now is just like normal, right? It's like we've had multiple different kinds of relationships, maybe not sexually, but like, yeah, I go to you for certain things. I go to Alex for certain things. I go to
Hmm.
Caitlin for certain things, right? We go to our different support network for different types of relationships and types of emotional support, like emotional intimacy and shared activities, whatever. But
Hmm.
now we have now that's like more accepted in the traditional relationship, and I think
Hmm.
that the my questions are always like, well, what is it like to raise a family like that,
Hmm.
but I mean I was raised in a blended family, right? Like
Hmm.
I was raised just as much by my stepmother as my other parents, so all this is like more normal. We just put names on it. This
Yeah, I don't
feeling.
know. I mean, I have so many swirling thoughts. Like one is I think E&M provides the opportunity to have a true soul bond with your partner because you just have to communicate so much. You get to know them so much. You get to prioritize each other's needs in a really new and different way. And that's pretty incredible. And it also, and I think in polyamory in particular, assumes that your partner doesn't own your body. It doesn't own images of your body. Doesn't own what you do with your body. That there's a sense of autonomy where it's like, okay, well, we're doing the things to protect our union and our partnership, but ultimately, like, your body is your body. Your feelings are your feelings. Like, if what you value is continuing this partnership, we have to talk about what that means and how to do that. But also there's some understanding that you're truly your own person. And I think that's especially true in polyamory, where you can have multiple relationships. So that's all cool. But on the other hand, like, I don't know that I would want to talk about my relationship to this extent, because it can really bog you down. And imagine that you have all these extracurricular relationships, but your primary one is the one where you have to do all the talking. When is there time to have fun and relax when you're just constantly having to be like, okay, so I went on a date with Sarah last night, and like, this is what it meant, and oh my God, now I'm feeling jealousy, and I'm feeling insecurity. Now we have to talk through that. It's like, whoa. Depending on the partner, some partners might be like, oh, compersion, hell yeah, like, let me talk about it, like, tell me about it, did you film it, let me watch it, like, this will spice up us. But that's not it for everyone.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with jealousy and insecurity, and especially you're talking about blended, like, about families, imagine being pregnant and your husband's going out and fucking some other chick. Imagine being postpartum. I cannot imagine dealing with body image issues and a baby and worried about my husband going out and screwing some, like, firm, bouncy boobed 25-year-old chick. I
Well,
just
what if
can't
that's
imagine.
not if this is interesting, because it's really highlighting for you what the value is like, value is for your relationship is him looking at you in a preferential way,
Yeah,
right? Being like, you are the most beautiful.
that is
You're
it
the
has
one.
a value, to be clear. Yes.
It is the value you have, Jason, to be special. No, but for other people, like, they might want the peace that comes
Hmm.
with their husbands not being sexually frustrated. Because if
Yeah.
they're like, I feel like this, I know he's going to be a good father, he's a good husband, but I just don't want to feel the pressure to have sex all the time. So go and do your thing
Hmm.
and come back and be the best husband you can be,
Yeah.
right? For them, that might be like even better than just like, fine, have sex with a bouncy young girl, whatever. I
Right.
don't have time for this shit.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah, it could decrease guilt.
I think we're talking ourselves into like being into open relationships. I think like now
We
we're on.
might be.
Yeah.
I'm talking myself
All
out of
right.
it,
Next
quickly.
episode, I will share how it goes talking to Alex about opening up the relationship.
Do you really, and you think you would do it? I mean, what are
Yeah, I would. I mean, I've talked to him about. I mean, we've always like we're so new, so it's like we got together and then we got pregnant and then we got a baby and then we had cancer and then we moved right with this a lot of stuff in our relationship. But I've talked to him about like what would it be like if down the line like we explore. I think that I would want to explore with him. I don't know how I would feel of him going off and doing other things, because I think my main goal for that would be to increase my intimacy with him. It would be like to see that side of him and discover that while we're both engaging in a sexual relationship or something. I don't know. I haven't thought about it that clearly. I'm thinking about this out loud as we speak. So this will be a good template for our conversation with my husband. So, but I would be open to it. I mean,
yeah.
marriage is long, man. Like, life is long. I can't believe we have so many years left. I'm
Yeah.
like
I mean, it's
tired now.
this is why I really hope we can get a guest here. And I've asked a friend of mine, but I imagine she has to think about it. Um, just
Yeah, a
because,
lot of
like,
our polyamorous friends are more shy to talk to talk
yeah, well,
openly
because
about it.
of
But
all the
makes sense.
judgment,
Yeah.
which sucks. Because in some ways, I respect them more than monogamists, and it obviously depends on the people. But I do, I guess, a final point here is, like, the community aspect. Would think so. The people that I found struggled less, like, lived in New York. I don't have that great of a sample of, like, people outside of New York, but I've seen it happen. It's been hard. And I think some of the reasons are, like, when there's a community like the one that I was adjacent to in New York, there was a lot of, like, almost swinging going on, where it was like there were known entities within the community, and they would all kind of date each other all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that solved a couple of problems. One is that they had a bunch of role models and examples of other people doing this. So it wasn't just the lone E&M couple. It's surrounded by a sea of monogamists, which would feel very lonely and you'd have to justify yourself constantly. Um, so that was one problem. But I think the other problem is what my friend pointed out is like one thing you have to be prepared for in addition to communication is the differences in what you'll be able to pull in because women are going to be able to pull in many, 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 many more dates than men are,
Hmm.
especially with like online dating going on. He's like, there are tons of men on the dating apps looking for flings because duh. And so, like his girlfriend can just go on and, just rifle through all of her choices and just pick one and know that there will be $50,000 that she can go for. But with him, it's like a desert. And so I would assume for a lot of men, they're like, ooh, open relationship. Like, I met girlfriend, I can fuck a bunch of other people too. Nice. It's like, no, you are actually most likely putting yourself in a position where you're watching your girlfriend fuck other people and, and you have to wait a very long time.
Cool. So actually, this is gonna favor us.
But if you're in a community, right,
Hmm.
there are like women there who might be willing to touch your penis. So, it's
Join
just
a
like
community.
right.
If you
And then
like me, join a community.
there are sex parties, right, where there's like, okay, our community, we have parties where we can go and like explore this, explore kink, explore other partners, like explore a way to connect with our partner in a different way, in a kinkier way, in a voyeuristic, exhibitionist, whatever the case, like swinger, whatever the case may be. So there's just a lot more infrastructure there for these relationships, which isn't to say that if you're like a New York polyamorous or M person that you definitely want to be in like one of these particular communities. I wouldn't because I hate communities, but for a lot of people it works very well versus being in Missouri like our fan here. I don't know. It would just
No, maybe there is. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
hope I mean I hope so. Like it sounds like she's making something work, but I bet it's a very, very different dynamic.
I just bet in smaller cities that,
Yeah.
you just run the risk of there's just like
Well,
fewer
unless
people.
Missouri is not a liberal state.
Hmm. Hmm.
So there's that
Yeah,
too.
yeah. How do you get into it? How do you find these communities? Asking for a friend.
Because what happened was I don't know how to do it now. When I was in, this all goes back to that guy I told you about in the career episode who found me when I was 17 and he was 30 and like
Uh-huh.
tried to groom me.
Yeah.
He was he was poly.
Got it. Got
And
it.
so I met people through him and then I got into OkCupid and OkCupid was a hub for
Mm,
them. And
mm,
so I just kind of naturally met people that way. And then that got me into the community. Then I met my boyfriend. And I was like going to these parties and I met, other people that way. So I was like pretty much in the know for a
mm,
period of time. It just wasn't for me. Okay. So I want to give some tips from my friend for how, how this can go better and like basically pitfalls to avoid. So one thing he said is that like opening up a relationship can be an amazing way to strengthen an already strong relationship, right? So communication's good, but going too quickly can alienate your partner.
mm,
So you want to go really, really slow and check in and take care of each other. And if you imagine doing this, right? Like you're in this relationship, it's been monogamous, and then you're like, okay, like, let's try this thing. And then you go out the next day and fuck a stranger. It's like that's a lot to take home to your
mhm,
partner.
mhm,
Instead of, hey, like I'm flirting on online dating. Like, here's my online dating app. Look at that. What do you think? And then like swiping together or kind of checking in about that, like flirtatious conversations, check in, check in, check in. Okay, what emotions are coming up? How do we process this? Are we still interested?
mm.
Um,
Every step of the way, talk about it. Yeah.
yeah.
Interesting.
Um, and then he talked about the women and men thing, about how women can find dates much more easily. And then he said there's something called NRE or new relationship energy that fucks up a lot of people in relationships. So basically, this is the dopamine cocktail. When you connect with somebody new, sexually or romantically, you can have these really strong, you can have a fat infatuation, basically, this really strong feelings. And that can throw everything into question where it's like, oh my God, this infatuation. I idealize this person. They're amazing. What if I actually want to be with this person instead? I haven't felt this way for my partner in years. what does this mean? Ugh. And that's the threat, right? So you kind of have to be um, aware that that might happen. That's normal, and that it doesn't necessarily mean it's like it doesn't mean that that's how it would continue to feel.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow, that's also really useful for people who cheated and then they go, "Oh, wow, now maybe I fall in love with them," and then you hear that they're,
Mm-hmm.
go with that person and then we're, go into a regular relationship. That's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. I love those tips. That was, yeah, thank your friend. Those are good.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, friend. That was it. He was like he's one of the most brilliant people like on this topic in this space, and so I love hearing his thoughts. And actually, I think like kink could be another episode that we do at some point too,
Yeah.
and how that can influence all of these
Yeah.
dynamics. But for now, I hope that was a decent primer on E&M and different things to think about. Hopefully, we'll get you a guest who actually lives this lifestyle soon. Maybe that guest is Kibby in 6 months after she and Alex have opened up their relationship.
I'll do it for the podcast.
Yeah.
For you, all you guys.
That is a really going in eyes wide open of why
Yeah.
you're doing this. Very
Hmm.
intentional. Yeah.
Communicate with you and everyone else about our personal lives.
All right. Well, we hope that you all are still monogamists and just only love us and only ever want to listen to us and just love us so much and would never like any other podcast better. And if that's true, please give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It's okay, guys. Even if you listen to others, just do it anyway, and we'll know we can trust you. See you next week. By accessing this podcast, I acknowledge that the hosts of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of medical or any other professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The hosts do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement.